Do you remember that feminism thing? Feminism. An interesting topic. What does it mean? Where was it from? Where is it going? Why? Etc., etc. What I see right now is the end of feminism. I see it clear, plain as day. Feminism is dead. What I see is a resurgence of reality, because feminism was just a deviation from reality, a lie, the emperor's new clothes, so to speak. It was a scam, like a lot of these things, and it's dead. Feminism is dead. There is a gravestone, and upon it is the word feminism. And it's a real relief, because I grew up in a time which was, I think, when feminism was reaching its zenith. And the thing is that I think it began to die before it did its most harm, did the most of its harm. So I would say that feminism probably peaked in the 90s and early 2000s, and then it actually had begun to lose steam, but it carried on doing damage all the way through to basically now. So I'd say that the trajectory was from, say, I don't know, anywhere back. The thing is that, to me, feminism is not really a new thing. Okay, there have been periods of time in history which I have observed. I'm no expert on this, but I'm pretty smart. I pick things up. There have been time periods in history wherein the feminine has kind of got out of hand, in a way. What do you mean, got out of hand? Shut up. Okay? The point is, if you look back at fashion, for example, okay, now you might even tie this into the Emperor's New Clothes comment. If you look back at fashion in, let's say, I'm not exactly sure here, but I'm going to go with the 1500s, 1600s, thereabouts. I think that's the right era. You had the advent of the fop, F-O-P. Now that was a condition of fashion for men which entailed them dressing and behaving, in fact, like a bit of a waster, a bit of a loser, but with soft tendencies. Now I wonder about this. I wonder about what precipitated this kind of thing. Was it an abundance of men in the world, or a lack of men in the world due to war? Now to me, and this is quite a philosophical, debate or question, I've thought a lot about this. To me, that life is very logical. So if you have an abundance of men, you're going to have a war. That seems necessary, because the competition between men for women, if we cut it down to the bare bones, is going to be too high to sustain a non-combative male population. Now, if you look at today, right, this feminism stuff has softened men, and we haven't had war for a long time. I'm not advocating it, per se, but I am going to state that it is a real fact of life, and that it thins the herd. I haven't been to war. and I have something of an understanding of what it entails, and it is anything up to and including absolute horror, which is why those who have experienced such things don't really want to talk about it, etc., etc. But in our society, being so soft and wibbly-wobbly as it is, with manhood having been attacked and undermined by feminism, we have men or males who aren't perhaps ready for that sort of reality, going into it and coming back from it into a society which is so wibbly-wobbly that they don't even have support from other men around them for what they've been doing. Now, if you draw this way back in throughout human history, murder of other males between tribes, completely normal. Completely and utterly normal. You can lie about it, you can pretend it isn't so, all you want, but it's true. It's always been the case. Now, you could argue, well, that's evil. Well, we are human beings and we are capable of good and evil. So, I don't know how far I want to go, into the good-evil debate. But when we're talking about feminism and masculinity and war and such things that affect society and how people behave and how many men there are available or how many women there are available, there are instances whereby war decimates the male population. Okay? Now, if you had, in the 1950s, in America, what did you have? You had this perfect housewife ethic. Why? Because men were scarce. A lot of them got shot and blown to pieces. Okay? And this is in America this was a big thing. Probably translated a bit to Britain as well. So I think in that period, you had a scarcity of men. Not a massive scarcity, but it was enough to change the way women behaved. Okay? I think some of this is somewhat natural. Some of it's engineered, some of it's somewhat natural. So imagine, put yourself in a woman's shoes. She's now competing with women for men. So what's she going to do? She's going to try and behave the way that men would like her to behave. Because if she doesn't, the man will choose a woman who is behaving the way that he might want her to behave. So you had this perfect 1950s American housewife sort of thing. May not necessarily be that simple, but I think there's an element of this in it. You could say, well, that was, a result of economic boom and just, people buying products which were tailored towards, housewife work. I don't know. But the point is, when there are few men, women behave themselves. And if you look at what feminism has done, you say, behave themselves? What do you mean? Shut up. So, if you look at what feminism has done to society, you've got men, you've got an abundance, a massive plethora of men for women to choose from, and most of them are soft, weak-willed, wibbly-wobbly, flippy-floppy pansies. Okay? And then you've got this thing in the background literally telling people to be gay or homosexual. Okay? So you might have people who are naturally a certain way, but then there's this thing of making it into a fashionable thing, okay? Which is confusing a lot of people and making a mess, really, of society. Now, at the moment, we probably have an abundance of men, okay? And I see the potential for war and conflict thinning the herd. Now, in times of war, all the men go. The wibbly-wobbly ones and the real men. And the real men are usually killed through acts of valour and heroism, if they're lucky. And the wibbly-wobbly ones either find manhood and become stronger men, or they are just decimated as waste, because they're not strong enough. So, and you might find this quite brutal in, logical or philosophical terms, but it's true. So, where are we right now? We're at the end of feminism. Now, why has feminism died? Feminism has died because people have logically deduced that it's nonsense. It's like run its course as a fashion fad. And it's fantastic. But what does it mean for our society? Does it mean that without it we're going to plunge ourselves voluntarily into war? Well, we've got this Iran thing floating around. We've got the Ukraine thing floating around. And I think that the future does entail war. But I don't think it's going to be world war per se. Could be. And I don't think it's a nuclear problem. But I think we must accept it. I'm just speaking purely logically now. It's something which has always been there. Pacifism has its place. But I think you have to accept both sides. You have to understand that, men tend to be engaged in that sort of thing. So I see this happening. I see this switch back to reality, and I'm wondering if indeed it does have something to do with a natural growth of the male population. I mean, if you look at the human being as a species, this seems to be exactly what we do. We kill each other. We just do. I think that we can try and stop it and run away from it as much as we like, but it's never going to go away. It's always going to be there, somehow, some way. But so is pacifism. I think pacifism has always existed too, to some extent, because you have to have some sort of balancing force. There will be a sort of a high point in any sort of conflict whereby people are like, okay, that's enough. And so we'll return to normal. Anyway, that's a bit of a deep topic, the whole thing. But I see that feminism has died. Now, feminism, I'm saying, is a recent thing, but it's also existed in some forms, perhaps, throughout history, when there have been situations where there have been, perhaps, let's say, an abundance of men. I mean, maybe the fop thing happened, that style whereby men in the 15 or 1600s were dressing kind of like flippy-floppy fashion, because there were so many men around. Maybe there hadn't been much war, and the men, I don't know how this thing happens. I want to give it some more thought, but what I'm saying is that feminism is dying now, this modern ethic of it, or instance of it, and maybe it's been there in the past as well. Maybe it's actually a part of a natural phenomenon that comes and goes, depending upon the circumstances prevailing. If you've got an abundance of men, then women become the scarce commodity, and they can start acting up and being obnoxious, but ultimately they end up realizing at the end of the day that they need men to do the hard stuff. And I think it's funny for me that now we're seeing that awareness returning, yet we don't have this diminished male population, which I think is quite curious. This stuff must be logical, cause and effect. So anyway, I'm going to give it more thought, but that's a brief sort of, discussion on the topic. It may seem a bit meandering, but it's all on topic. Some of it's a bit brutal, but it's a brutal topic. It's reality. And feminism represents fantasy. It literally represents fantasy because it's based upon nonsense. So yeah, I think it's worth exploring, especially now that feminism has died, or it's in its last throes. You can see it everywhere. And we will go back to a reality which is male run. That doesn't mean women aren't significant, because they are. But we'll go back to a real ethic where men and women both benefit, instead of feminism whereby everyone suffered.